class, I think, or a third. So let me begin the introduction now that we have this nice slide here. So we are very honored and pleased to have Shamsi Iqbal from Microsoft joining us today. She is a principal researcher in the Productivity and Intelligence Group in Redmond, and her expertise is primarily in the domain of attention management and interruptions. She's recently focused on redefining productivity and introducing novel ways of being productive through leveraging micro moments and balancing productivity and well-being and interaction design. Her research is related to future of work, and it's been covered in The Economist, The Atlantic, and the Technology Review, Germany in recent times. Her work was featured in the New York Times, and MIT Tech Review, also covered by the King 5 News, NBC affiliate in the Seattle area. I know she does a lot of work in the conference management world as well, especially for human computer interaction conferences, and is serving as the ACM Tokai Associate Editor, Guest Editor for IEEE Pervasive Special Issue on Future of Work. And she was the General Co-Chair for WIST 2020. So I read this document the Microsoft released on the future of remote work, and she is one of the co-authors. And Shamsi received her PhD in computer science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 2008 and bachelor's in computer science and engineering from Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology. All right, so again, we're very pleased to have you join us, and let's welcome her with a big round of virtual applause.
Well, thank you so much, Alice. Let me see, I should share my screen. I'll go ahead and just share my screen again. Share, okay. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone, I'm Shamsi Iqbal, and it is really my pleasure to be here today at KAIST virtually to talk about productivity and well-being balance. I mean, obviously, it's certainly a downer that I can't be there in person. I would have really liked to visit Korea, and KAIST is so well known in the HCI field for doing some amazing research. I already know some of you who are doing really, really impressive technology development. But I mean, there is some benefit of being able to give this talk from the comfort of my home office at the end of the day here in Seattle. And then after this talk, join my family for dinner and, well, talk about work-life balance. I did have to threaten my kids to not come into this room and ask me for dinner. So just, they might still show up. This has happened in the past, so please bear with me if that happens. Okay, so, well, when I can move to the next slide. Cool. So in terms of work, different countries and locations have been implementing different modes of working as we have been going through different waves of this pandemic. And as I was chatting with Alice a little while ago, I mean, we still haven't gone back to the office place completely. And one long-term change that seems to be pretty apparent is that we will likely never go back to exactly how the workplace operated before. And to that end, I'm going to start this presentation by the proclamation that hybrid work is going to be the new future. Now, this isn't particularly surprising because given the past year, our experiences in remotely teaching, remotely attending classes, remotely attending conferences, and even social interactions that happen remotely, we have learned that this is actually possible. It doesn't totally suck. So the flexibility that remote work offers to many people prompted top CEOs middle of the year, this year, to make some pretty bold decisions about committing to being hybrid when the opportunity to return to work comes. And so, I mean, every big company, Google, Apple, Microsoft, IBM, everyone has some kind of hybrid plan that they have in place. And this is well grounded in where the trend is shifting from how people have been specifying how they want to work. Microsoft publishes, I think it's twice a year, Work Trend Index. And the report that they published earlier in this year showed that 66% of the leaders are saying that their company is considering redesigning office space for hybrid work. 73% of the employees, they want flexible remote work options to stay. And at the same time, 67% want more in-person work or collaboration post-pandemic. And this is kind of like almost at odds with each other. And this is exactly why hybrid future presents so many challenges, and many of them are super exciting to think about as researchers. So despite having some form of remote alternative, we still crave and need many of the in-person interactions. And it is safe to assume that while people value the flexibility, they also want to retain the benefits of working in person, which means for the masses, fully being in person or fully remote will not really be a preferred option. People would want to have that flexibility in how they attend work and be able to work from home and work from other locations if they have the opportunity to do so. So adapting to hybrid work that provides the best of both worlds is going to be far more challenging than we just adapted to remote work by itself. So as a researcher who has been spending the past decade and a half studying multitasking, attention management, distractions, productivity, and more recently balancing people's work, social, and well-being needs, the core question that I am now grappling with is, what should an individual's experience be in hybrid work? And this is not really trivial. And this is because, and to quote my colleague and good friend Sid Suri, productivity is personal. We may have similar aspirations and goals, but our paths to reaching those goals can be very different. And while the discrepancies in that experience have always been there, they have become further more attenuated during the pandemic. And this is why we are now deeply thinking about how we can empower all individuals, because everyone's experience matters. To bring people's best selves to work, people have to be able to have the best support they can. And I'm going to ask you to take a look at this slide with the lens of accommodating a large variety of personal circumstances that make the playing field extremely uneven. And some of them include considerations of how people can get work done within the constraints of their flexibility needs. How can we ensure that people's work gets recognized and valued when maybe you're not always in the workplace? How can we support people with their well-being needs and manage the energy to do high quality work where organizations might trying to be prioritizing getting work done and deprioritizing the well-being needs? And how do we ensure that individuals belong and have equitable experiences regardless of when, how, and where they work? So to this end, I would like to deliver 2 key points. Number 1 is that the definition of productivity has evolved. Rather than being about how much we can churn out in a given amount of time, productivity has gradually become more about the creativity and the innovation in the workplace. And John Friedman, who is a CVP in design and research, has termed energy as an important conduit to productivity because he sees that as being a function of creativity and innovation. And this brings us to the equally important second point, well-being. Well-being is the new currency, not to get us towards healthier life, but towards overall better selves. And this is because well-being is well beyond wellness. According to Calvo and Peters in their book Positive Computing, constructs such as motivation, engagement, self-awareness, empathy, altruism, compassion, all are connected to well-being. Now, while it's probably clear how the top row can benefit individual productivity, the bottom row is connected to more collective benefits, which is why gains from balancing productivity and well-being is important for organizations so that they can become more collectively creative and innovative. And this means that organizations must also care about well-being, because if we want to empower our people, organizations must be bought into it as well. Now, what are individuals and organizations thinking about their aspirations about hybrid work? So a few months ago, we did a survey which we sent out to a bunch of individual end users or employees, as well as business decision makers. And this survey was about how people were thinking about and planning about hybrid work, both from the employee and the business decision maker point of view. We're still analyzing the data, but some early trends show that the top 3 things that individual workers want are flexibility, smooth transition between their work environments when they're working from home and they're working in the workplace, and support for work-life balance. However, when we look at what the decision makers are prioritizing, we are seeing that they're actively looking at helping people transition easily between work and their home environments, and they're voicing their support for better work-life balance. Uh, and most companies have been pretty vocal about this and for catering to people's work and life needs, and especially as people's work life gets implanted into their home life. Interestingly, they are less committed about flexibility, and only 25% of the business decision makers are making this a priority. And when we talk about flexibility, this is in terms of working hours, this is in terms of how you can divide synchronous work where people have to be together at the same place, well, not necessarily the same place, but at least at the same time connect, and asynchronous, which means that people will have to separate out the work that they can do independently on their own and in their own time. Okay, so I am going to get back to my original slide about empowering people. These are all problems that I constantly think about, but they're also not something that is going to be solved in the short term. But I'm going to focus on this one because there are some solutions that we have been working on in the past that might become applicable in this current context. So the question that I'm trying to answer is, how can individuals be supported in their well-being needs to manage their energy to do high quality work? And I'm going to provide 3 possible directions and how we can start doing this. Of course, there are many other ways, but these 3 threads actually show how pre-pandemic research that we did, completely unaware that our lives would change substantially in 2020 onwards, and how we can reimagine this research to become really applicable when we started facing some really unique challenges that we didn't predict at all. So the first challenge is how we can maintain work-life boundaries. And the concept of work-life boundaries is obviously not new, but the way that it has been perceived has evolved over time. Research dating back to the early 80s looked at work and life as 2 competing sides of a vertical axis where people could only prioritize one over the other. And then it took more than about 20 years for this to reach the state of being some kind of a balance, where people were starting to acknowledge that both are equally or close to equally important. But that was also found that it wasn't quite accurate, and which may give way to the more flexible model of work-life integration. This model acknowledges that there are trade-offs in one's expenditure in attention and effort between these 2 domains. And again, work-life integration is highly personal. The model posits that one's level of integration or segmentation and the flexibility operates as a function of multiple factors, which are all influenced by personal needs. These could be personal interests, their needs, their values, the role that they have in their workplace, the control that they have over their work style, or even their home life, the resources that they have available, and other external circumstances. So when the pandemic started, Mary Sherinsky, myself, Gloria Mark, Jamie Tivan, and Gina Su, we decided that, okay, let's run a survey and try to understand how people are being impacted by remote work, and especially in terms of their work-life balance. And so we did a survey that with external people, so not people at Microsoft, but mostly information workers, both in industry and academia. Well, I shouldn't say information workers in that case, but people in academia as well as industry, and how their work-life balance was being impacted. So we did a regression model on boundary control that showed that people's work-life boundaries were worse when they had higher job demands, they had a less sense of control in work, and they had more children under 18 in the household, which explained 20% of the variance. Now, the children under 18 in the household was important because when everyone was remote working, at least in the US, most kids were also remotely learning. So it really presented this challenge of people having to continuously switch their attention between their work life, their home needs, and their kids' needs. So I'm going to now switch over to another aspect of work-life boundary, which is in terms of the commute. And the commute is interesting because the commute puts a physical distance between your home life and work life. And pre-pandemic, I think that many of us who had to commute had large complaints about the time that we were wasting in commute, and how that could be put to better use if we just didn't have to commute. And if I flip that a little bit, when the pandemic started, one thing that people thought that, well, was really good about the pandemic, that we no longer had to commute. And even today, I felt, as I dropped my kids off at school and I came back right away and joined a meeting, I felt that, yeah, it's really cool to be able to be at home and just take that 5-minute break to drop my kids off at school, and I don't have to sit in traffic for 30 minutes to get to work. But if I flip it, yeah, I have more time available to get work done. I could kind of like answer a few emails. But the challenge is that because you are not putting that physical space anymore between your work life and your home life, that presents a huge problem, because it is just difficult to transition from your home life to your work life when there's no time to do so. You're just like switching just like that, in and out. So this is where some research that we did in 2017 came into play. And back then, and this is research that I did with Jamie Tevan, led by Alex Williams, who was our intern at that time, but now he's a faculty member at University of Tennessee. And the challenge that we are grappling with then is that, well, how can we help people transition between their home life and work life? And is there a way that we could help use that commute time to help people ramp up to work as they're heading to work, and ramp down from work as they're heading out of work towards home? And part of the reason is that, well, both Jamie and I have kids, and I mean, we felt that we were overloaded when we got home, and then we had never quite disconnected from work, and then we come home and they're just like, we are now suddenly moving into this like highly demanded home life situation. And so we are really, without disconnecting, it becomes difficult to kind of maintain both sides of your life. So and back then, in 2017, digital assistants were also becoming really, really important and promising. And so what we wanted to look at is that, can we use this digital assistant concept to help people with this disengagement and re-engagement, and using that commute time to help? So what we did is that we looked into organizational behavior and occupational health psychology, and then there was also further proof there is that if you disengage at the end of the day, and adequately disengage, and then you re-engage the next day, that helps with better productivity. And so what we did is that we looked into cognitive behavior therapy literature, and we found that we can actually achieve this pretty simply with just a couple of simple questions. So we explored two types. One type was more task-centric, where at the end of the day, to disengage, the agent would ask a person what they did that day, and what they wanted to accomplish or do the next day. And these were the two questions. If people wanted to interact more with the agent, it could do some. It wasn't terribly intelligent. It could just like listen. But these were the two questions it was asking. And then there was also another aspect of it. There was an emotion-centric version of it. So that would ask people how they felt about work that day, and how they wanted to feel about work the next day. And that was getting more towards their perceptions about or reflections about the feeling around work. And then the next day, when they would come back, the agent would remind them of what they wanted to do as they had said the day before, and they would ask them to think about what the first step in that task would be. And for the emotion-centric one, again, the agent would confirm with them is that yesterday you said that you wanted to feel, I'm going to make it up, energetic. Is it still what you want to feel? And what is the first step in doing so? So what we found is that by helping people reflect and disengage, and then remind them the next day, and help them with that first hurdle of deciding what they wanted to do first, 61% of the participants, they felt more productive after a week's interaction. And there was about a 12 to 15% increase in their self-reported productivity. And this was really cool, because it showed, and this was just about a couple of weeks use. This was interesting because it did almost appear that this was counterproductive, that, well, if you're not thinking about work after work, I mean, wouldn't you be less productive? And it turned out that people were also, they were able to relax more. We collected some telemetry data about whether or not they were doing something at the end of the day, and we found that people were engaging in less email, which is one metric that is used to figure out whether or not people are continuing work even after hours. So during the pandemic, this research came back in a completely different setting. And so there was this product team, which is called Viva Insights. And so they really wanted to help people with this concept of virtual commute, where rather than physically commuting, you mentally take this commute where you are going through the same kind of actions of disengaging from work. And well, they don't have the re-engaging piece yet, but they really wanted to explore this idea is that, well, can you help people kind of like quickly note down the things that they need to do the next day and help them disengage? So this is a feature that has rolled out in Teams. And if you use Teams, you can check it out and see how it works. What I like the best is making the list of things that I need to do the next day. I mean, I usually do it on paper, but having it on done through virtual commute, just it comes back as reminders the next morning and super useful. So I'm going to move on to challenge 2, and this is about integrating well-being needs into a person's workday. And this is also important because I think in traditionally our workplace, we don't think of well-being being something separate that we need to take care of. But again, as we work from home and work from the workplace, our well-being needs are going to change. So again, research pre-pandemic came back. We wanted to, in 2016, we really wanted to understand what is the effect of digital breaks on people's productivity and well-being. And part of this was motivated by the fact is that, well, people tend to go on many non-work related sites at work. Is it really that bad? What happens if we take it away entirely? Will that make people more productive? How does it impact their well-being? And this was work that I did with Mary Sherinsky and Gloria Mark. So we did a 32-person in situ study where we didn't actually collect telemetry data for this one. We just collected like different measures from validated scales about focus and engagement, productivity, their workload, and individual traits, because we were really interested to see if there's also a personality effect on how people reacted when people did not have these digital breaks available. And this was partly motivated by some other research that we did that showed that there are people who score higher on the neuroticism aspect. They tend to be able to focus less. So that was kind of like our motivation behind exploring this. So what we found is that blocking digital breaks results in people having higher perceived productivity. They feel that they're being more productive. They felt that they were able to be more focused in their work, but they also reported that they found time to pass really slowly. So, I mean, if you think about the concept of flow, this is opposite of flow where, I mean, in flow, time passes so fast that you don't realize this. And this was opposite of flow where they felt that time was really stuck. And they also reported that they were finding work less enjoyable, which means that there is actually some importance in taking breaks and getting rejuvenated. And there's this concept of emotional homeostasis where you have to basically let go of all the high stress, I would say, endomorphins that kind of like keep you focused, and then you need to let go and get back that energy. But we also found that these effects were highly individualized. People who report to have less self-control in our validated scales, they benefited from not having distractions. And people who had reported to be more conscientious found that they had higher degrees of stress when you took away the digital breaks, because these were the people who were just like very methodical and they would schedule their breaks at a given time. They would work productively before that and after that. But once you take away the breaks, they continue working, but they also get super stressed. So this is also this became also more apparent during the pandemic, which is no surprise. And so this is not research that we did, but Microsoft's Human Factor Labs, they used EEG caps to measure beta wave activity, which is associated with stress and in the brains of meeting participants. And so they had people who were participating in meeting and collaborating around I think 4 topics. And they had like one group had no breaks and the other group had breaks. And they found that for those who were deprived of breaks, their average beta wave activity rose as time passed, which suggested that there was a buildup of stress, and increase that you can see here is depicted with the colors shifting from cool to hot. So
Can I ask a clarifying question,
Mm-hmm.
just to, the breaks here, you mean just digital breaks, or they can still take like coffee breaks and.
So this one in particular, so the other research, yes, that was just about digital breaks. They could, so basically we put a software called Freedom on their computer that would just block anything. But they were free to go and take. And one thing that I forgot to mention in that research is that we actually found that people were taking more walks, and they wouldn't walk to the kitchen, and they would go outside because now they had no longer the ability to go to Facebook or anything. This one was about any break. So basically you're having meetings, and one group was allowed a break during the meeting, the other one wasn't. So
Oh,
this was
wow.
any break.
That
Yeah.
seems
So,
kind
but
of
it wasn't a
torture.
long meeting. I mean, you can
Okay,
imagine
okay.
that, well, we have a 1 hour meeting and you don't get a break in that
Oh,
meeting. I
okay,
think
I see.
that's pretty common. It wasn't like a whole day. But the other
Yeah.
research was for the whole day, you can't take digital breaks, but you can take as many physical breaks as you want.
Okay.
So we last year, as my summer intern, who was an undergrad student, so typically we have graduate students, but we also host some exceptional undergrads. And so he and I decided to kind of like think about, okay, so it is challenging for people to find time to take care of their own needs, because now their calendars are just filled up with meetings. And can we actually help people automatically insert some time blocks into their calendars that will correspond to different types of times that they need for themselves? It could be just to get a break, just to maybe prepare for something so that it doesn't keep on getting eaten up by meetings. And so what we did, or what he did actually, so developed this Outlook add-in that would analyze a person's calendar, and then would take these empty slots and try to insert different types of personal time. So it could be right at the beginning, time to plan for the day, time to focus, time after and before and after meetings, so that people could take bio breaks, or they could prep for the meetings. Time set aside for well-being, it could be that go outside and take a walk, or maybe just like do some kind of exercise in the home, and then time to disengage from the day. So what we found is that when time is blocked on the calendar like this, one is that you are protecting that time from being taken away by someone else who wants to talk to you or want to have a meeting, but also sent a signal to that person themselves is that this is your time and you should be taking care of whatever your needs are. They could be productivity needs, but they could be also other personal needs, that I need to go and check on my kid's school, or I need to go and take a walk because I've been sitting in front of the computer all day. And we found that once we schedule these times, 48% of the focus time entries were used. So not everything is going to be useful. Sometimes people just don't want to break their flow of work, and they just like ignore whatever is there on the calendar. But we did find that, well, about a third of the well-being breaks were used, which to us felt that it was a good first step. And this also shows in these comments, because people, what they said was that at the beginning they really didn't want to take these break times because they felt that they would have to make up for them later. But some people said that actually made me more efficient because I knew that I had taken the break. So when I came back, I was really super focused and got my work done. So it's based on these kinds of outcomes, it's certainly promising to hear that leadership at the top is publicly talking about the importance of taking break during work and emphasizing the need for technology to operationalize breaks in their daily routines. I'm going to suggest that we take it much further and revolutionize our tools to adapt to the need for flexibility in general. I mean, you could imagine that our tools can help us figure out what work needs to be done with other people. And what are the synchronous parts of a bigger project, and what are the asynchronous parts, and how can you make sure that there aren't dependencies on all of those things. So this moves me into the last challenge, and I'll try to keep this short, but this is basically thinking about how we can interleave work with other activities. And this is partly motivated by the fact, especially when we are working in a situation where we might be attentionally challenged. Let's assume that maybe it's working in the lab with other people, working at home with roommates or family members, and in situations where you can continuously get interrupted. Imagine you're working in a coffee shop. So, I mean, in these cases, finding focus time and long chunks of focus time to get work done is difficult. So one thing that we did find in this study that we did earlier in 2020 is that everyone said that they're interleaving their personal and family responsibilities and work. People let their work creep into their personal time, and their personal needs encroach their work day. And this was particularly true for people who had children, but I think this was true in general for people. So the key point here is that if we think about a day that is fragmented like this, there are many moments that seem just unusable. Let's imagine that while we're waiting for, one example that I like to use is that if I'm cooking something and I want to interleave attending a meeting that I really don't have to contribute to, I just want to listen to it. I mean, it's one, for one is that should I be doing that in the first place? But sometimes I am able to do it because I have the flexibility, and maybe it frees up some time elsewhere where I can actually put it to better use. So for example, taking a walk. But the point is that there are many micro moments in the day that seem unusable, and if you put them all together, you can get substantial work done, but by themselves, they don't seem that very useful. So this is where the concept of microtasks and microproductivity comes. And this is work that Jamie Tivan and I did for a number of years, where we wanted to understand, we took this concept of crowdsourcing and we said that, well, can we turn it towards ourselves, and for this concept of self-sourcing, where we can give small tasks just like crowd workers get and give them to us to self to get them done in these like fleeting moments. And the notion of these micro tasks that we call them, that it's perceptual units of behavior, and they can be completed individually in short bursts of time with limited context. And the good thing is that because you are the person who created that micro task, you already have a little bit of context. Once you start giving those micro tasks to others, then you'll have to share a bit more context with them. But at least for self, that is, the context needed is not that major. And the microproductivity concept is about how you transform, you take these big, large tasks and you chunk them into these smaller tasks. Now, we already do microtasking in today's world. If you think about it, we quickly check email, text messages, we IM each other, we maybe take care of our to-do list, we can do some quick browsing. What we typically don't do is writing papers or creating PowerPoint presentations or programming. So I'm going to give some quick examples of microproductivity that might work in hybrid work scenarios. I mean, these are, again, work that we did pre-pandemic, and our scenario there was when we, a couple of scenarios. I think that one is where we have to interleave something else with our work life. So that was one. The other one is when we are in an attentionally challenging environment. So maybe we have access to a phone, and where it's limited, not only limited attention, it's also limited screen real estate. There is, and I'll come back to this later, but I do want to make this point here, is that of course we are not promoting that you should be working all the time. Quite the opposite. What we are saying is that sometimes that nagging thought of some work-related item at your back of your head can actually impact your presence in whatever else you want to be present in. So if there's a way that you can quickly take care of it and be done with it, then you can be fully present in what you're doing. So that's kind of like my motivation in promoting microproductivity. So one project that we had explored, and that was kind of like building a little on Michael Bernstein's work with Soylent, is that how can we take a large document and decompose it into smaller subtasks, show them on a mobile device, and kind of like gamify the experience so that it doesn't really feel like work, and then the changes get integrated back into the document. So we tried with like simple tasks like correcting spelling or grammatical corrections, or maybe taking care of comments or triaging changes and those kinds of things. And the way that this was presented to people was, instead of presenting the whole document like on the phone, like mobile Word, you just get snippets of the text, and your task is very much constrained within that snippet. And so it shouldn't technically take you more than a few seconds. And we designed it so that it felt like a game. So what we found is that people found it useful, but they also wanted to create their own microtasks. And so we did another study later, which I don't talk about here, where we allowed people to create their microtasks, and we studied what type of tasks they created and where they would do these microtasks. And one of the things that we did find is that doing these microtasks helped people keep the content fresh in their head, and they felt that they were actually making more edits through these microtasks. And this was done in time like commuting time or before a meeting started, so they were not eating up all their free time to do these microtasks. So the next one is also, it was a fun project where we wanted to see that, well, I mean, things like Facebook distract us. Can we actually use microtasks to break people out of that distraction? That was one motivation. The other one is that we just wanted to see what happens if we do show people microtasks in their non-work related sites. And so in this case, Facebook was the experience that we looked at. And so how did people react to it and what did they do? So what we found is, in this particular case, is that people were pretty good at ignoring the micro tasks, and it took them about 2.5 minutes to even start looking at one of them. And once they would interact with some of them, in some cases they would just move on and treat them just like any other interaction within Facebook, and they would continue with their browsing. And in some cases, about 20% of the time, the microtest encouraged them to break out of their Facebook journey and go back to the document that they were working on. People did say that this was a lightweight way of engaging with activities that were backgrounded, and they really didn't feel that it was grabbing a lot of their attention. But at the same time, they felt that this would be a good way for them to refresh their context with documents that they haven't been interacting with in a while. So imagine that I was writing a document 2 weeks ago, I have kind of forgotten. So you can use these microtests to refresh that context. The next one, I would say that it was a bit more controversial in the sense that we wanted to understand what people could potentially do with a speech-based agent in the car and this was mostly thought of in terms of autonomous vehicles, because at some point I was really interested in kind of like helping people think about what we can get done in an autonomous vehicle where you're not driving the car. But this one was done in a driving simulator where people had to drive like routes that we created, and we wanted to see that can an agent help people start contributing content through very targeted questions. And this was, again, we got some mixed results because we found out that, well, even though the questions that we created or the agent presented were very context free, as we thought, it turns out that people automatically start creating the context in their head, and then it becomes difficult for them to manage. So they were able to do simple things like, create an introductory slide with some picture in the middle, but creating content itself or filling out the bullet points was more difficult. So they could create an outline, but as soon as it became a bit more complex, that would become taxing. So those are kind of examples of microtasks that you could use, and I wanted to bring this back to the current state of the world. Is that, well, you can imagine that you are interrupted when you're at work and you have to really switch out of work, or you need to go and do something, you need to interleave work with some other activity. So one way of moving or making progress in work could be through microtasks, where you can still move the tasks forward without having to rely on getting focused uninterrupted time. So that's one example that I like to use, which I have done myself during the pandemic multiple times. So I'm going to move on to kind of like the end of this talk, because I would like to keep some time for questions if we still have time. When we think about empowering individuals, especially in this currently rapidly changing world, I mean, as you are students and you are coming up with different new innovative ideas, I'm going to challenge you to think about what new innovations in design and technology can we think about that can support new modes of working, while also prioritizing well-being and growth and flourishing of people, because we don't want people to get burnt out. But what new ideas are there that we haven't even thought about and could be possible because we have the technology, we have the AI support in the back? How can we make people's life easier? And the other thing that we always have to think about as people who are developing technology is that, well, what societal changes need to happen to make it acceptable to use these technologies that are balancing productivity and well-being needs? And that's a pretty big one, because it's not only the societal changes, it's also the changes that need to happen in organizations who are trying to maximize their profit. If you maximize their profit, does it make sense for people to focus on their well-being? That means that, are you looking at the short term or the long term? So those are kind of like more societal issues that we need to think about. And finally, how can we ensure that the need for flexibility in how we work does not disadvantage certain populations? And this is really, really important, that we should not be developing technology that only works for a certain set of people or a certain set of privileged people. We just need to make sure that our designs never leave anyone behind because of where, how, and when they work. And with that, I'm going to end this talk and on this question slide. And yeah, I mean, if people have questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much. So many interesting studies, and I can ask like a million questions about each of them. Let me remind the students, you can simply unmute yourself and speak up, or you can type your question into the chat and I will try to read them to Shamsi. Does anyone have questions?
I know that was a lot of content. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. So yes, I have some question about the measuring productivity, because you said that there is a lot of things is relating to productivity, but it is very difficult to measure the productivity, and also it is directly related to the motivation of improving productivity. But you said that there is digital assistant. There is a research about digital assistants to help this engagement and re-engagement. And it said it shows their self-reported productivity was improved. But self-reported productivity is just it is. I think that is very subjective things. So I want to know how your research team is trying to measure the productivity, or is there any other way to do that? Just yeah.
I think you're asking the $1,000,000 question, to be really honest. And I mean, it's a really difficult question right now to answer what productivity means. I mean, according to the industry definition, it's kind of like how much work you are producing in a given amount of time. But we know that for information work or any kind of like brain work, you really can't quantify it in that way. And unfortunately, I mean, the best proxy for productivity that we have right now is through self-reports. I mean, and there are other proxies that people use that come from telemetry data around, okay, how much time are you spending on a given app, or how much time you're spending on a given group of app? Are you focusing on productivity related applications versus non-work related applications? So we have used these kinds of metrics in the past to understand whether or not people are engaging with work. But as you said, it is such a complex concept. And I think that the other thing that we have also realized is that, well, just because I have this document open for 1 hour and I might be typing in it, we can't say for sure that that is actually productive work. And so right now we are really trying hard to come up with the definition of productivity within Microsoft. I mean, there are some productivity definitions that developers use. For example, the number of pull requests that they do, which is some signifies work. But I mean, these are all proxies and not necessarily great ways that are generalizable to say that, well, this is how we should be looking at productivity. I mean, if people were like machines, they would have to-do lists and they would check off things and you could use that. But people do work in different ways. And so that's why it's so challenging. Yeah. So I don't really have an answer, but I can assure you that that is one big question that we are trying to answer.
Yeah, then especially in Microsoft, it is not that various, I think.
No, I think that the point is that people use proxies such as how much time are you spending on the applications. I think that's, or are you typing, or I mean, if you have eye tracking or webcams, are you reading? You can look at those kinds of signals, but it's not something that is widely available for most people. I mean, we have tons of telemetry data, but we can't look at that even. I mean, we have a lot of like privacy guardrails that are put on that, so we can't very easily go and say that, oh yeah, I want to find this data. But yes, I mean, we have in our work in the past just looked at the average time people are, so frequency of task switching, that is one example that we have used. I mean, we have looked at keyboard and mouse activity as another metric, but I mean, those are just proxies, and those also don't present the complete picture.
Okay, thank you for responding.
Thanks, that was a great question. I am always scared to get that question, but yeah, really, I'll be honest that, I mean, none of the productivity researchers have a good answer for this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question and answer. We have a question in the chat. What are some, and this is from a student, Ho Chang Lee. What are some current policies or efforts made by Microsoft to help employees achieve work-life integration?
That is a really good question. And I think that at the end of the day, it depends on the individuals, but it's always important that the organization provides support. So for example, I mean, there are some organizations that, I mean, some organizations within Microsoft, so there are different orgs, that they have a no meeting day. And so on that day, there are no meetings that are supposed to be scheduled. You get your own work done. So what happens is the remaining 4 days gets a lot of meetings, but you know that on Friday, it's going to be a no meeting day. You leave your individual works for that day. And there is now thoughts going on around how we can continue this as we move into hybrid, because that's going to be a big challenge when some people will be working on different days at home, and how can you kind of like get those together, make sure that you still are able to have days where you can focus and days where you can get together. The other thing that has happened, and I know that this has happened in other orgs as well, or maybe other organizations or companies as well, and was happening before, is that starting meetings a little later and ending them a little early. So, and I'm just reading this book on the surprising science of meetings. And so it's basically your meeting or any work fills into the time that's available. And you actually don't need an hour-long meeting. And in many cases, you can compress it into a shorter amount of time. And so what has happened, I think Outlook now allows you automatically, or at least some internal version of Outlook, that you can have it default to starting on not on the hour, but 5 minutes later. And so that sends the signal is that, well, you should actually start the meeting 5 minutes later. And we have noticed that people have like more chit chat that are happening during the meeting at the beginning because people are not meeting in person. So I would say that those are two big things. I mean, the other ones are, we have like flexible leaves, and I mean, people who need to have like personal time off, that has been increased beyond whatever we had before. But those I think would be kind of like just pandemic specific. I think that things like no meetings days, things like and the other thing is that people take a lot of walking meetings, so you can take meetings on your phone and you can just walk, and a lot of executives also do that as well. So I would say that these are maybe the three things that are really happening right now to make sure that people are able to take care of themselves.
Let me just put in a question before I lose my spot again. The designing your day work, I think that's really interesting, and I think we all need to do that. And a lot of us already do it with other tools. But these breaks that you design into your day, I think, can be broken down more. So some are going to be chores, and you mentioned picking up kids or maybe cooking for them. You can cook for yourself, put in the laundry, whatever. And then there are some breaks that are really just about yourself, getting coffee and enjoying your cup of coffee. And then there are some breaks that can be social too. And I think if we're at the workplace, a lot of these breaks are social, like you go to the, coffee room and you just hang out and chat, which is a little bit harder to do. And you don't have these serendipitous social breaks anymore. So did you find, the results or like people's feeling of well-being and being taken care of kind of differs depending on the type of the break that you design into your day?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good question. And I mean, before I answer it based on the data that we saw there, I mean, in Teams, you can also schedule focus time for yourself. So that's kind of like in the product world. And I never used it before. and I started using it during remote work, and it was really a blessing for me. And I would say 50% of the time, I don't use it for focus work. That's kind of like time that is protected on my calendar. I could use it for different things. I could use it for taking a walk. I could use it for putting laundry in. I could use it for different things. And that's one of the things that we are curious about, the designing your day study, is that what are people using these breaks for? So one mistake that we made there, for example, for the meeting stuff, we called it the break before and after the meeting. We called it the meeting prep time and debrief. And almost no one used it for that. Except for there were a couple of people who said that, oh yeah, I had a presentation, so I used that time to kind of like run through the presentation one more time. But in most cases, what happened, because, and it's important how you call these breaks. People said that, well, I didn't really have anything to prep for in that meeting, so I kept on working. And in hindsight, if we had just called it kind of like break before meeting and after, so that we can put some time between meetings, I think that people will be more willing to take a break during that time, and they would go and kind of like maybe take a bio break. Well, they would take a bio break anyways, but they would use that to kind of like just refresh themselves. So I think that it is important for people to, so there are two things. One is that you can actually direct people to do different things based on how the breaks look like. But the other thing is that there's also some flexibility, because it's me time, and I can use it in any way that I feel is important for me. And I think that the important piece there is then that organizations should be open to people using these times for themselves. I mean, in the workplace or when you're in the university, I take a walk, or I'm moving from one place to another during a meeting. That already adds that physical break. I'm not like hitting the leave button and adding the join button and clicking on the join button right away, because then I have no breaks. But when you're in a physical space, you already have, as you mentioned, these like serendipitous conversations that you have with colleagues. Those are the social breaks. I think that the social breaks in the virtual worlds, I think those are the most difficult ones, because everything is a meeting. I mean, even if I want to go and talk to you, Alice, it's still, I have to schedule a call or those kinds of things.
Yeah, unless we just all like have Gather Town open all the time or something, which is, not so great. Yeah. Okay, let me put in one more question, and then I'll let the students take over and other faculty. About self-sourcing or microtasks, right? So you micro moments, micro tasks, and you called it self-sourcing, which I thought was really great.
That's Jamie's
there
term.
Must be okay. And we have Chuho here who did learner sourcing. There must be benefits of actually designing and sort of breaking down your paper, for example, into micro tasks, other than just using up time in a flexible manner. Do you find that the quality of the work could also be affected perhaps in a positive way? Just saying, today I'm just going to look at this abstract and really make sure that it gets cleaned up, rather than I'm going to spend an hour working on this paper. And also related to that is like the driving situation, right? If you have a microtask that you're doing, sort of interweaving into other sort of menial tasks that you're doing and trying to make that introductory slide, would that sort of negatively affect the quality? So my question is about the quality of the work.
So let me answer the quality based on a study that we did in 2015. And this was with Justin Cheng, who was interning with us. We wanted to see what happens with the quality when you do tasks via microtasks. And this was based on 3 types of tasks. I think there was a math task, or there was some kind of transcription task, and there was something else, I think something related to content creation. And so it turns out that when you break down tasks, the quality actually, so you make less errors, you are doing it more efficiently because now these are broken down, but you need some extra time to combine the results back. So because you're breaking them down, there's this extra step of bringing them all together. But in general, the other thing that was good about microtasks is they're more resilient to interruptions because they're so small. If you get interrupted, you can still finish it and then switch over to whatever the source of interruption is. The other thing about just this practice of breaking down a task makes a seemingly overwhelming task seem more manageable. And again, some work that we did with Carrie Kai. We have had some amazing interns. Uh, and Carrie Kai looked at how we can use microtasks. She's at Google now. Microtasks to help people ramp up to a more challenging task. And can you use microtasks to start building context? So, for example, if you start with a super simple one and then you increase the difficulty a little more, and then you keep on increasing the difficulty a little more with the next one, but around the same content, suddenly find that people have created or recreated the context around that content, and then it's more easy for them to now ramp up and do something much more complex with it. So there are definitely benefits apart from, yes, I'm making use of my micro moments. You can use micro tasks in your focused moments as well. I mean, oftentimes what I find difficult is just to get into that focus mode. And then if you have some short things to do or quick and easy things to do, it makes it much easier.
Yeah. It's something that I sometimes just do just out of, just because it makes things easy. But if you really have a system of doing it, I think it would be great. Okay, let's have some other questions.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Of course. I was just about to say, Juho, I really like your background. I don't know if it's real or not, but I love it.
It is actually real. That's all I've done during the pandemic, decorating my office for my work-life balance.
Yeah, I painted a wall. I can show it a little bit. I mean, my office is a mess, but this was a white wall,
nice.
And now it's kind of like a nice.
It's nice.
Yeah, I like the frames too. Yeah, so I mean, I was actually going to mention some of these personal practices that people have to improve their productivity. So I try to follow things like assigning a few hours for deep work and intentionally adding breaks to my calendars and so on. And some of them work and some of them don't. And my question is about the role of interactive systems in that whole ecosystem. There's organizational factors, there's personal motivational factors. And of course, new systems can help people to some extent, but I think without the help of all these other surrounding factors, their effect might be somewhat limited. So based on your great system building experiences, can you comment on how those factors could be better designed to support the effect of the benefits of the systems?
I mean, that's a great question, Juho, and that's partly why we designed the microtask writing system as kind of like a gaming system. And I think the motivation originally came from Angry Birds. I think that Jamie used to play a lot of Angry Birds, and she wanted that. Well, I think that if I could get work done while playing Angry Birds, that would make me feel so better that I'm actually not wasting my time. So if you look at the design, it also looked a little like I didn't catch up much on Angry Birds, thankfully, but I think that, I mean, some kind of incentives is always good. And so incentives come in different forms. We thought about, well, maybe you can reward people in some way once they have finished. It's kind of like a session of focusing. And it could be that, well, I mean, if you are that demotivated, which I am oftentimes. And so I reward myself that, okay, I'm going to go and get a cookie or something. That's really bad, but sometimes I have to. That is the ultimate reward. Or you have that, okay, so you have worked and now you can take a 5-minute break and do whatever digital, I mean, non-work related things that you can do. I think that having some kind of incentive at the end is always important, because oftentimes our focused work may not yield the expected results right away. And so you want to make sure that people come back to it and continue the focused work or continue the challenging work. Because getting into the flow state, as much as it has been hyped, I think oftentimes it's difficult. Just getting into that. I mean, most focus is challenging and frustrating, and it just requires people to have enormous mental power to stick with it. And I think that during the pandemic, it has become extremely difficult. So I would say if systems can come up with ways of providing incentives, providing some kind of rewards, maybe some of them can be super cheesy, but sometimes those cheesy things also work. I mean, having this like little congratulatory bubbles show up and stuff. I mean, oftentimes those are annoying, but sometimes they could indicate that, well, it indicates that I have achieved something. And sometimes just that feedback is also important. The other thing I think is what is really important, and I don't quite know how to operationalize this, but maybe the students can think of ways, is that having the social factor built in. I mean, how can we engage our peers and our coworkers and our mentors and our mentees to kind of like provide us that support and that incentive? Uh, there are things like, I think that different organizations have been experiencing with different these like praise sending tools. I don't know how useful it is, but once I get one once in a while, it feels really good, and especially the ones that come out of nowhere that I'm not expecting, because if people start misusing them or overusing them, then it's no longer fun. But I think that these small gestures that didn't seem to matter before, I think that they're becoming more important now, because it's very easy to get burnt out and feel demotivated. And I think especially for students, I think that pandemic or no pandemic, I think that we all have gone through periods of slumps where we feel nothing works. And I think that that's where our tools can play a role, of course, but I think that just thinking about the overall social factor and acknowledging that people are also social beings, I think that that's going to be important as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you for the great answer and the great talk.
Thank you. It was fun being here while not being here. I hope you didn't hear my children screeching in the background.
I heard a little, and it gives even more pleasure to the talk.
It kind of like shows the challenges in balancing work life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's fun. I love seeing kids and pets like.
Oh yeah, I enjoy seeing pets in particular so much, because they're kind of like it's very interesting to see just like a pet lying on the lap of someone who's super serious, and then there's a pet or just like right beside the keyboard or something where the pet looks far more serious than the owner. And it's quite interesting. I find it really it lightens up the environment, and I think the other thing is that it also shows people in their own environments. And I think it's super important that you learn more about people. I know more about my colleagues now as people rather than just work colleagues, because I see them more in their environment. And I think all my colleagues know my kids because they have seen them at some point.
And Sangwoo, you had another question. Was that a hand?
Yeah, I have a question about microtasking, because I actually started doing microtasking recently. That is very interesting, but at first time it was very hard. Microtasking is actually good strategy, which is same with divide and conquer, but it is, to me it was very hard because I don't know how to separate those words. And also, it is very difficult to expect how much time it will take, in such microtask. If I think that it takes 1 hour, then but it takes more than 1 hour, then I think again, it's just again delaying. That kind of thing makes me very disappointing to myself. But yeah, so just I want to share my experience about microtasking, because microtasking is that it seems like the only way for very productive and very skillful people, such as professor or good programmer. But normal people cannot do that, microtasking. Yeah, so
I think it's a great point, and I think you make also a great case for having tool support for this. And I think I totally hear you when you say it's just difficult. I mean, the fact that you take a complex task and break it down, and so keep on decomposing, so that then now you have a series of smaller tasks, that is not easy. And I mean, part of why we develop tools and we want tool support or a system support is that it takes care of these kinds of things so that we don't have to do it. And one of the things that we were actively exploring when we were coming up with these microtasking systems is that, well, I mean, for one is that there are a couple of approaches here. One is that you specify that these are the micro tasks, which is not scalable or generalizable, which is where we started our first exploration with the word system playwright. Or the other one is that people define their microtasks. And so you could imagine that, well, I'm writing a document, but as part of writing that document, I have this microtask where I need to go and look up this reference or find this stat. It becomes a microtask because it's a small thing, but I also don't want to break my writing flow and go look for it, because as soon as I switch out of my Word document or my editor, I will get distracted as soon as I go to the web. So that means that you create this microtask, it is held somewhere, and it pops up for you at a later time. So that is the other. So, but you are now defining the microtask. You are saying that, okay, find me the population of Washington State, for example. And that's something that you have defined. No one else will define this for you. It's not like go and correct the spelling. But what we realized that if we want to make microtasking systems more commonplace, we need to find a better way of defining these workflows. And so how can a system automatically create microtasks? And so I can point you to a paper that Harman Kaur from University of Michigan, she led when she was an intern with us. And that was a CSCW paper. I think it was published in 2017 or 18. And so that's where we explore how we can create these workflows for Word documents or just document editing. And so basically the notion was that she came up with these unit tasks, and you can combine these unit tasks in different ways to come up with microtasks. So that's kind of like our first exploration, is that, well, instead of having to define it entirely yourself or just having these small tasks, you could combine, mix and match these unit tasks, and so that it will still be a microtask. It's not as unit as those actions. So that was one way that you could think about it. But the idea is that systems eventually, maybe AI becomes, it can see enough examples and it can start extracting some of these microtasks for you. And depending on what context you need, what time you have available, what device you're working on, it presents you the right thing at the right moment. So the dream is that you don't have to go and create your own microtasks. You just specify to a system that I have 5 minutes, give me something to do, and it will figure it out on its own. That is the dream. We're not there yet. So if we are, I'll let you know. But that was the motivation.
Yeah, that seems like a dream system. I need something like that. We have a raised hand. Yunso, Choi.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for your great talk. And I'm just like interested in many like microtask and productivity, and like just a random question, but it's based on my daily routine. So like some people like me feel difficulty when they change the mode from the like productive task to the break, or vice versa, because like it's too productive to unproductive or something. And like, was there any exploration on like, should we seamlessly like support them by connecting them, or should we rather create some huge gap between productive and unproductive tasks so that we can make it more engaging for each task?
So the way that I like to think about it is that it's better to ramp down and ramp up. So when you're switching from productive to unproductive, so maybe you kind of like slow down a little, just like you don't want to hit the brake and stop your car right away. You start slowing down and then stop. So I like to think of it in that way. And so, I mean, from kind of like a practical experience point of view, what I do before I switch to something, and especially if I feel that I'm in a productive state and I don't want to lose it, but at the same time I do need to take a break, or I do need to get lunch or whatever, I write down the first 2 things that I want to do when I come back. And so that's kind of like my process of slowly easing out of that focus state. I mean, mind you, sometimes you don't want to get out of that focus state, but if there's a need that you need to, so one is that try to wrap up what you are doing in a easily resumable place. So if you're in the middle, say for example, you're writing a paper and you're about to finish a paragraph of thought on something, or maybe a results section, make sure that you complete that. If the break taking is completely under your control, sometimes interruptions aren't, but if it's a break that you can control, try to leave it at a state that you feel that you have completed something, because if you don't complete it, it will be there at the back of your mind. If you haven't or can't complete it, I would say try to write down the first things that you need to do when you come back. In general, even if you have completed something, it's better to write down that when I come back, these are the first 2 things I'm going to do, because that helps you again with that ramp up piece. So I like this ramp up and ramp down model because it prevents the abrupt switches. And I feel that the abrupt switches are always the most mentally disturbing ones, because you feel that you haven't gotten closure on what you were doing and now you have to jump on something else.
Thank you.
Hopefully it helps. I mean,
Yeah.
I have been using my notepads a lot, but I also feel that I wish there was a better system of capturing this. Sometimes just that pen and paper and brain connection is the easiest thing to do, but it's also difficult to maintain it.
I'm going to let the students go in a couple minutes, but before I go, I thought I would bring up the last bullet of your last slide, which is really important, right? So people with disability, people with small kids, people in rural areas, people in jobs that do not support this type of flexibility, all kinds of people can be disadvantaged, not really explicitly disadvantaged, but people who are taking advantage of these flexible work-life balance may get far ahead, and then the others may get left behind. What are your thoughts, and do you have some research results or research direction for future research?
So there are a group of people at Microsoft Research who are working on this, and it's kind of like thinking about the impact on society. I mean, Sid Suri is one example who is actively thinking about how can we create these equitable experiences. And note that I say equitable, not equal, because the experiences aren't going to be equal. I mean, for obvious reasons that you mentioned, people have disabilities, they may have like resource constraints because of where they're working. And so I think that the first thing is the mindset change from the top. And my biggest worry is, and I really hope that this is proven wrong, is that if people feel that they're falling behind because they're trying to take advantage of the flexibility, they will give up that flexibility because some other people who are more privileged are able to go forward faster than them because they don't need that flexibility. And I think that this is overall, I think that as just human race, I think we just need more empathy and we need more awareness about other people and supporting. We want to grow as a community, not grow by ourselves. I know that that is a lot of lofty words. And I think that at the end of the day, people will prioritize their needs. But I do think that we need to get past this notion of extreme competition and rather think about the big picture where we can work together and bring everyone else up together rather than leaving some people behind and just moving ahead by ourselves. I know that that's kind of like not necessarily a technology answer, it's more of a societal answer. But I think that otherwise we won't be able to take advantage. I think that we are at this inflection point where we can really make some big changes that will be better for everyone. The question is that, do we really want to when the challenges seem quite daunting? Because remote work was something that everyone had to do. We had no other option. And right now for remote work, everyone is almost on equal footing. I say almost, that is not necessarily true because some people are having it far more difficult than other people. But even then, I think that it's not a mix of people being in person and people being at home yet, but that will soon be the case. And I think that that's when the inequalities are going to come out.
Yeah, I just many challenging issues when we do talk about the societal impact of
right. I think that's, I mean, as for students, I think that's really great because there are so many interesting challenges to think about. And I think that, I mean, this generation of students will have the opportunity to think about developing technology with a broader space in mind. Is that, well, I should I develop technology just because it's cool or it addresses a problem? How does it impact society? How does it impact people? Who benefits from this? I think that it brings forward so many different challenges and considerations. And I think that, I mean, the world would be a better place for it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'm going to say officially this Colloquium is over. Let's thank Shamsi again for a great talk and really great Q&A as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, again, I don't know if this would have happened that easily if it wasn't the remote world. But yeah, I mean, I was really happy to interact with you all. Some great questions I had no answer to. But I mean, I think that's the beauty of this space is that, well, I mean, there's so many interesting questions and that keep coming up.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And very nice meeting you. And
Yeah,
hopefully
same
we'll
here.
see you in person someday.
Hopefully, fingers crossed
Yeah.
it will happen at some time.
All right. All right. Have a
Okay, well,
nice
thank you.
evening.
You two have a nice rest of the day. I keep on forgetting. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much. And thanks for the flexibility in moving the talk so that I could present
Yeah, you're
eligibilly.
welcome. All right.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.